Martha Simmons was never one to snoop. She prided herself on being a trusting wife, a loyal friend, and an honest person. For 15 years, she had built a life with Paul, her husband. They had a 12-year-old daughter named Emily, a modest but cozy home in a suburban neighborhood, and the kind of marriage that seemed to glide smoothly on the surface. Martha was a middle school teacher who loved her job and her family in equal measure, content with the rhythms of her routine life. But that evening, the rhythm was disrupted by a single moment of chance. It began with something as innocuous as tax season. Paul had been preoccupied with work lately, claiming that the end-of-quarter reports at his accounting firm were keeping him at the office longer than usual. Martha didn't question it. After all, she trusted him. They had been through the ups and downs of marriage together. Financial struggles, Emily's early health scare, and the inevitable disagreements that any couple would have. But they always seemed to come out stronger. Paul was dependable, predictable even, or so she thought. Martha had been searching for some old tax record from the previous year. Paul had asked her to gather them, insisting he'd handle the filing over the weekend. His home office was meticulously organized, almost to a fault. Everything was labeled, color-coded, and arranged by date. Martha had always joked that he could open his own library with the level of detail he put into filing away every single piece of paper. But that evening, as she rifled through the cabinets, she noticed something odd. The file was labeled Will Testament. Martha frowned. They had discussed writing a will a couple of years ago, back when Paul's uncle had passed away without one, leaving a mess of legal complications for his relatives to sort through. But as far as Martha knew, they hadn't actually gone through with it. She hesitated, her fingers resting on the edge of the manila folder. She knew it wasn't her place to pry. Maybe it was just a draft, a formality he'd forgotten to mention. But something about the way the folder was tucked away behind older files, almost as if it was meant to be hidden, gnawed at her. Her heart thudded against her ribcage as she pulled the folder free and carried it to Paul's desk. Sitting down, she unfolded the clasp and slid the first page free. The words blurred for a moment as her mind tried to comprehend what she was seeing. I, Paul Simmons, being of sound mind and body, do hereby bequeath all my assets, including real estate, financial accounts, and personal belongings, to my real family, Denise Wilson and my children, Benjamin and Lily Simmons. Martha read the words again, her eyes scanning the page in disbelief. Real family? Who were Denise Wilson, Benjamin, and Lily? Was this some sort of joke? She flipped through the rest of the document, searching for any mention of herself or Emily. But there was nothing, not a single mention of them. Paul had listed their home address as a secondary property, a mere footnote in the list of assets to be divided among Denise and her children. Martha felt her stomach churn, a nauseating wave of betrayal sweeping through her. She pressed her hand to her mouth, as if to keep herself from crying out. This couldn't be real. It had to be some kind of mistake. But Paul's signature was at the bottom of the document, clear and unmistakable, dated just 6 months ago. That meant he had written this will while they were still very much together, while he was still coming home to her and Emily every night, while he was still kissing her goodbye every morning as he left for work. Martha dropped the folder onto the desk, her hands trembling. The room seemed to tilt around her, the walls closing in, the air thick and suffocating. Her mind raced with questions, each one more devastating than the last. Was Paul planning to leave her? Had he already left her in his heart? Had their entire life together been a lie? She glanced over at the framed family photos on Paul's desk. One of their wedding day, another of Emily as a toddler sitting on Paul's shoulders at a park, both of them laughing. Martha felt sick. If Paul was hiding this, what else was he hiding? And who was Denise Wilson? Was she some old flame from Paul's past, or someone he had met after they got married? And the children, Benjamin and Lily, were they even his? Martha's hands clenched into fists. She forced herself to take a deep breath to calm the rising panic clawing at her insides. She needed answers, and she needed them now. But how would she confront Paul without him deflecting or denying everything? Would he lie to her face, as he apparently had been doing for years? Would he tell her that she was imagining things, that she had misunderstood the will? Martha stood up, the chair scraping against the hardwood floor with a harsh, jarring sound. She couldn't sit still. Her heart pounded against her chest like a wild animal trying to escape its cage. She paced the length of the office, her mind replaying every interaction with Paul over the past few months, every unexplained late night, every business trip that suddenly seemed to take on a more sinister meaning. There had been signs, she realized, little things she had brushed off as nothing. Paul's phone, which he never left unattended. The sudden, uncharacteristic attention to his appearance. New clothes, a gym membership, a cologne she had never seen before. The way he had been more distant, more distracted, less engaged with Emily. Martha's hands shook as she picked up the folder again, staring at the words real family as if they were a foreign language. Was she not his real family? Was Emily not his real daughter? Was their entire life together nothing more than a facade? The sound of the front door opening jolted Martha out of her spiraling thoughts. Paul's voice echoed through the house, calling her name. For a split second, she considered confronting him right then and there, throwing the will in his face and demanding the truth. But instead, she quickly shoved the folder back into the cabinet, sliding it behind the other files exactly as she had found it. She couldn't confront him. Not yet. Not until she had more information. Not until she knew exactly who Denise Wilson was and what role she played in Paul's life. Not until she was ready to face the reality that her husband of 15 years might not be the man she thought he was. Martha plastered a forced smile onto her face as she stepped into the hallway to greet Paul, her heart hammering in her chest, the taste of betrayal still bitter on her tongue. Martha couldn't sleep that night. The words "my real family" echoed relentlessly in her mind, haunting her like a nightmare that refused to end. Paul lay beside her, snoring softly, his arm casually draped over her waist, as though everything was normal, as though he hadn't just shattered her world without even knowing it. Martha stared at the ceiling, her eyes wide and unblinking, her body rigid beneath the covers. She couldn't shake the feeling that her entire life had been a cruel, elaborate illusion. The next morning, Paul left for work as usual, kissing her on the cheek before grabbing his briefcase and heading out the door. His cologne lingered in the air long after he was gone. The new scent she had noticed a few months ago, one she hadn't bought for him. As the door closed behind him, Martha finally let herself breathe. The house felt empty, hollow, like a stage set after the actors had left. Martha sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had long gone cold. The folder with the will was still hidden in Paul's office, exactly where she had left it. But the words were burned into her memory. Denise Wilson, Benjamin and Lily Simmons. Real family. Martha swallowed the rising bile in her throat. She needed answers, but she couldn't risk confronting Paul without knowing more. If she confronted him now, he would lie. He was already an expert at it. 15 years of marriage had taught him how to lie with a straight face. Martha opened her laptop, her hands shaking as she typed Denise Wilson into the search bar. Thousands of results flooded the screen, but none of them seemed relevant. There were too many Denise Wilsons in the world. She needed more information. A terrible thought crossed her mind. What if Denise was someone from Paul's past? An old girlfriend, perhaps? Someone he had reconnected with over the years? But that didn't explain Benjamin and Lily. The children had his last name, Simmons. They couldn't be from before their marriage. Unless they were born after. Martha's mind spun, the possibilities multiplying like a virus. Was Paul a bigamist? Did he have a secret family in another state? Was she the other woman without even knowing it? The questions piled up, threatening to suffocate her. Martha closed the laptop and buried her face in her hands. She couldn't do this alone. She needed someone who could find the answers she couldn't. That afternoon, while Emily was at school, Martha drove to a private investigator's office downtown. She had never been the kind of woman who thought she would need a private investigator. But then again, she had never thought her husband would lead a double life. The office was small, tucked away in a nondescript building that smelled of stale coffee and old paper. The investigator's name was Linda Parker, a woman in her early 50s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She listened patiently as Martha recounted everything. The will, The names, the children, the sense of dread that had been gnawing at her since she found the folder. "Do you have any other information on this Denise Wilson?" Linda asked, jotting down notes in a yellow legal pad. Martha shook her head, feeling foolish. "No, just her name and the names of the children. Benjamin and Lily Simmons." Linda nodded thoughtfully. "It's not much, but it's a start. Give me a couple of days. I'll see what I can find." Martha thanked her and left the office feeling both relieved and sick to her stomach. She was relieved that someone else was taking on the burden of finding the truth, but the thought of what Linda might uncover made her stomach churn. What if it was worse than she imagined? What if Denise and the children weren't just a fling, but a second family? What if Paul had been living a double life for years? The next few days passed in a haze of anxiety and dread. Paul continued his routine as if nothing had changed. He came home from work every evening, asked about Emily's day at school, and made small talk over dinner. But to Martha, every word out of his mouth felt like a lie. Every glance, every touch, every kiss, all of it tainted by the knowledge that somewhere out there was a woman named Denise Wilson who thought she was Paul's real family. On the third day, Linda called. "Can you come in?" Martha's heart pounded as she drove to the office, her knuckles white against the steering wheel. When she arrived, Linda's expression was grim, her lips pressed into a tight line. "Sit down," Linda said, motioning to the chair across from her desk. Martha sank into it, her legs trembling. Linda slid a manila folder across the desk, and Martha opened it with shaking hands. The first photograph was of Paul, unmistakably Paul, standing in front of a small house in a neighboring city, holding hands with a dark-haired woman. Denise Wilson. Martha's stomach dropped. It was one thing to imagine it, to speculate, but seeing the photographic evidence was like a knife to the gut. Paul looked happy, relaxed, a man completely at ease with the woman by his side. And then there were the children, Benjamin and Lily, a boy and a girl with Paul's dark hair and unmistakable eyes, smiling up at him as if he were their whole world. "He's been seeing them every other weekend," Linda said. "He tells you he's on business trips, but he's actually with them. According to my sources, Denise believes she is his only partner. She has no idea you or Emily exist." Martha felt the room spin. She thinks they're married? Not exactly, but she believes he's committed to her. He's been supporting her financially, sending money every month to help with the kids. They live in a rented house. Paul pays for it. Martha's jaw clenched. Their money, the money she had worked so hard to save, the money they were supposed to be using to put Emily through college. He was spending it on them, on his real family. Linda continued. "There's more. The children's birth certificates list Paul as the father. He didn't even bother using a fake name. He wanted them to have his last name, Simmons." Martha's hands shook as she dropped the folder onto the desk. "How long?" 14 years, Linda said, her voice gentle. "Benjamin is 14. Lily is 10. He's been seeing Denise since just after Emily was born." Martha pressed a hand to her mouth, her breathing shallow and ragged. 14 years, nearly their entire marriage. He had been with Denise almost as long as he had been with her. How could she have been so blind? How could she not have seen the signs? Linda's eyes softened. "I'm sorry, Martha. I know this is a lot to take in." Martha nodded, numb. "What do I do now?" "That's up to you," Linda said. "You could confront him, or you could contact a lawyer, get your financial affairs in order. But whatever you decide, don't let him know you know. Not yet. Not until you're ready." Martha nodded again, but her mind was already spinning, the anger rising like a wave of molten lava, threatening to explode. 14 years of lies. 14 years of betrayal. A second family. And all the while, she had been the other woman without even knowing it. Martha stood up, clutching her purse to her chest. "Thank you, Linda." Linda nodded. "Take care of yourself, Martha, and call me if you need anything." Martha walked out of the office into the blinding afternoon sun, her mind reeling. The ground beneath her felt unsteady, as though the entire world had shifted beneath her feet. And in a way it had. The life she thought she had built with Paul was gone, obliterated by the discovery of another life, another family, another woman who had believed all the same lies Martha had. Martha climbed in her car and sat there for a long moment, staring blankly at the dashboard. Her hands trembled as she gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white. The tears came then, hot and uncontrollable, streaming down her face in torrents. Everything she thought she knew was a lie. And now, she had to decide what to do with the truth. Martha drove home in a daze, her mind a whirlwind of rage, betrayal, and disbelief. The world outside her car window blurred into a foggy smear of colors. She gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles ached. 14 years. 14 years he had been lying to her. 14 years of stolen weekends, hidden bank transfers, and secret rendezvous under the guise of business trips. She had been sharing her husband with another woman, a woman who believed she was the only one. When Martha pulled into the driveway, she saw Paul's car parked in its usual spot. The sight of it, the familiar dark blue sedan that she had seen pull in and out of that driveway for years, now filled her with disgust. How many times had he driven that car to Denise's house? How many times had he kissed her goodbye, said he loved her, then driven straight to another woman's arms? Martha's stomach churned as she climbed out of her car, her legs unsteady beneath her. Inside, the house was quiet except for the faint sound of the television in the living room. Emily was curled up on the couch, watching a rerun of her favorite show, oblivious to the storm brewing in her mother's heart. Paul sat beside her, one arm casually slung over the back of the couch, his attention focused on his phone. When he saw Martha, he glanced up and smiled. That same easy, charming smile that used to make her heart flutter, but now only made her sick. "Hey, hon," he said, his eyes sliding back to his phone. "Everything okay?" Martha forced a tight-lipped smile, the muscles in her face straining against the effort. "Yeah, fine." Emily jumped up and ran to her, wrapping her arms around her waist. "Mom, can we order pizza tonight?" Dad said maybe. Martha looked down at her daughter, her heart breaking. Emily had Paul's eyes, the same dark, deep-set eyes that could be so warm, so tender. Eyes that had looked at Martha for years with what she thought was love, but now felt like deceit. Martha swallowed the lump in her throat and forced herself to smile. "Sure, sweetie. Go wash up. I'll order in a minute." Emily beamed and skipped off to the bathroom, her ponytail bouncing behind her. As soon as she was out of earshot, Martha's eyes snapped back to Paul. He had gone back to scrolling through his phone, completely unaware of the fury simmering beneath her skin. Martha clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. The sight of him sitting there, so calm, so at ease, as though nothing had changed, sent a wave of rage surging through her veins. "What's wrong?" Paul asked, finally noticing her tense posture. Martha opened her mouth to speak, but the words tangled together in her throat, too thick, too heavy to force out. She couldn't do it. Not with Emily in the next room. Not when she was still reeling from everything she had learned. Martha shook her head, biting down so hard on her lip that she tasted blood. "Nothing," she said, her voice tight and strained. "I'm just tired." Paul nodded, already turning his attention back to his phone. Martha felt the urge to scream, to grab that phone and hurl it against the wall, to shatter it the way he had shattered her heart. Instead, she turned and walked into the kitchen, her breathing shallow and uneven. She braced her hands against the countertop, staring down at the granite surface as if it held the answers to all the questions burning inside her. How could he do this to her? How could he look her in the eye every day, kiss her goodnight, make love to her, and then drive to Denise's house and play the role of devoted father to 2 other children? Martha's mind spun with a million unanswered questions, each one more devastating than the last. Later that night, after Emily had gone to bed and the house was cloaked in silence, Martha sat alone in the living room, a glass of wine trembling in her hand. Paul was in the shower, whistling some nameless tune, as though his life hadn't just come crashing down around him. Martha stared at the empty space on the couch where he had been sitting earlier, replaying Linda's words over and over in her mind. He's been seeing them every other weekend. Denise believes she is his only partner. She has no idea you or Emily exist. Martha's chest tightened, her breaths coming in shallow gasps. Denise had no idea. That meant Paul had been lying to her too. The rage that had been simmering beneath the surface boiled over, spilling out in a hot, bitter wave. Before she could stop herself, Martha stood up and stormed down the hallway to their bedroom. The shower was still running, steam curling beneath the bathroom door. Martha flung open the closet door, yanking out one of Paul's shirts, the soft blue one he had worn just last weekend when he claimed he was at a business seminar. She pressed it to her nose and inhaled, her nostrils flaring at the unfamiliar scent. Perfume. Not her perfume. A flowery, sickly sweet scent that clung to the fabric like a stain. Martha threw the shirt to the floor and sank to her knees, her chest heaving with sobs. When the bathroom door opened, Paul stepped out, a towel wrapped around his waist, his hair dripping wet. He froze when he saw Martha on the floor, her shoulders shaking, the shirt crumpled beneath her hands. "Martha?" he said, his brow furrowing. "What's going on?" Martha looked up, her eyes red-rimmed and wild. "Who is she?" Paul's face went pale. "Who is who?" "Don't," Martha snapped, her voice breaking. "Don't lie to me. Not anymore." Paul swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. "Martha, I don't know what you're—" "Denise Wilson," Martha spat, throwing the shirt at him. "Who is she?" Paul's jaw clenched, his eyes darting to the door, as though searching for an escape route. Martha stood up, her fists clenched at her sides. "How long have you been lying to me? How long have you been sneaking off to play house with another woman and 2 children who have your last name?" Paul's face twisted, his expression a mixture of fear and desperation. "Martha, please just calm down. Let's talk about this." "Calm down?" Martha's voice was a raw, ragged scream. "You want to calm down? After I found your will. The will that leaves everything to your real family? Is that what we are to you? Fake. Just some convenient cover while you play daddy to 2 kids I never even knew existed?" Paul opened his mouth, but no words came out. He stood there, dripping water onto the carpet, his face ashen. Martha's chest heaved as she fought to hold back the sobs threatening to choke her. She wanted to hit him, to scream at him, to make him feel just a fraction of the pain he had inflicted on her. But instead, she just stood there, staring at the man she had once loved, the man she thought she knew. "How could you do this to me?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "How could you do this to Emily?" Paul's shoulders slumped, his gaze dropping to the floor. "I never meant for you to find out like this." Martha laughed, a bitter, hollow sound that echoed through the room. "And how are you planning for me to find out, Paul? At your funeral, when I stood there listening to your lawyer tell me that everything we built together belongs to another woman and her children, were you going to wait until then to tell me the truth?" Paul said nothing. He just stood there, his hands hanging limply at his sides, the towel slipping lower around his hips. Martha shook her head, the tears streaming down her cheeks, unchecked. "I don't even know who you are anymore," she whispered, and as she turned and walked out of the room, leaving Paul standing there in stunned silence, she knew that the man she had married 15 years ago was gone forever. Martha didn't sleep that night. She lay awake in the guest room, staring at the ceiling, her mind a storm of conflicting thoughts. In the master bedroom, she could hear Paul pacing back and forth, his footsteps a constant, maddening rhythm. Every now and then, she could hear him muttering to himself, his words too muffled to understand. The house felt foreign now, a shell of the home she once thought was her sanctuary. It was as though the walls themselves had absorbed Paul's lies, every room haunted by the echo of his deceit. The next morning, the house was quiet. Emily was still asleep, her room at the end of the hall filled with soft, steady breaths. Paul sat at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee cooling in his hands, his eyes hollow and bloodshot. He hadn't shaved, and the dark stubble shadowing his jaw made him look older, worn down. Martha entered the kitchen, her face expressionless, her movements stiff. Without a word, she poured herself a cup of coffee, the sound of the liquid hitting the mug loud in the silence. Paul swallowed, his throat bobbing. "Martha, can we talk?" Martha sat across from him, her eyes fixed on the steam rising from her cup. "What's there to talk about?" Paul set his coffee down, his hands shaking. "I never meant for it to go this far. I never meant to hurt you." Martha let out a bitter laugh, the sound sharp and hollow. "You didn't mean to hurt me? You lied to me for 14 years, Paul. You made me believe we were a family while you were playing house with another woman and 2 children. You left everything to them in your will. How am I supposed to feel? How can you sit there and say you didn't mean to hurt me? Paul's jaw tightened, his eyes glistening. I was stupid. I was young. Denise and I, it just happened. I thought it was over between us when I met you. But then she told me she was pregnant with Benjamin, and I panicked. I couldn't just abandon my own child. So, you abandoned me instead? Martha's voice broke, and she clenched her fists under the table, her nails biting into her palms. You let me believe you were a good husband, a good father, while you were living a double life. Paul ran a hand through his hair, the tension radiating off him in waves. I tried to end it. I did. But then Lily was born, and I couldn't just walk away. I didn't want them to grow up without a father. Martha's eyes flashed. And what about Emily, our daughter? Do you know how many weekends she cried because you were working late? How many times she asked why you couldn't make it to her recitals or her soccer games? You missed her 10th birthday, Paul. You said you were stuck in traffic. Were you with them? Were you with your real family, while our daughter sat at the window, waiting for you to come home? Paul dropped his head into his hands, his shoulders shaking. I am sorry. I know I've been a terrible father, a terrible husband, but I love you, Martha. I love you and Emily. Please, can't we try to work through this? Martha's chest constricted, a painful, suffocating pressure. Work through it? How, Paul? How do we work through this? You've been living a lie for 14 years. You've been giving our money to another woman, to her children, while you left me to balance our finances alone. Paul looked up, his eyes red and swollen. I can end it with Denise. I will. I'll cut all ties. We can go to counseling. We can. Martha shook her head, her jaw clenched so tight it hurt. You don't get it, do you? You can't just erase 14 years of lies. You can't just pretend that your real family doesn't exist. And what about Emily? Do you plan to tell her she has a brother and sister she's never met? Do you expect her to forgive you for missing her entire childhood while you were playing daddy to another family? Paul's face crumpled, and he buried his face in his hands. I don't know what to do, he whispered. I don't know how to fix this. Martha stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. You can't fix it, Paul. You can't fix what you destroyed. She walked out of the kitchen, her heart pounding, her vision blurred by tears she refused to let fall. Upstairs, she stepped into Emily's room. Emily was still asleep, her face soft and peaceful, completely unaware of the chaos that had torn her family apart. Martha stood there, her heart breaking all over again. How could she protect her daughter from this? How could she keep her from feeling the same betrayal that was consuming her? Martha's phone vibrated in her pocket, and she pulled it out, her stomach tightening when she saw Linda's name on the screen. She stepped into the hallway and answered, her voice strained. Linda? I found something, Linda said, her tone grim. You need to come to my office. Now. Martha hung up, her pulse racing. She left a note for Emily, saying she had to run an errand and would be back soon. Paul was still in the kitchen, his head in his hands, oblivious to her departure. Martha grabbed her keys and drove to Linda's office, her mind racing with possibilities. What else could there be? What more could Paul be hiding? When Martha entered the office, Linda's expression was serious, her jaw tight. I did some more digging, Linda said, motioning for Martha to sit. It's worse than we thought. Martha sat down, her heart pounding. What do you mean? Linda handed her another folder. Inside were bank statements, financial records, and a series of emails. Martha scanned the pages, her eyes widening. Paul had been funneling thousands of dollars into a secret account in Denise's name. And not just for child support. Payments for private school tuition, extravagant gifts, vacation expenses. He's been living 2 lives, Linda said, her voice flat. And he's been using your joint account to do it. Every time he told you he was investing in stocks, he was actually paying for trips, jewelry, and school fees for Denise and the kids. He even bought them a car. Martha felt sick, her stomach twisting into knots. All those times Paul had told her to cut back on spending, to save for the future, he had been using their money to fund his other life. The life he had chosen over her. Martha closed the folder, her hands shaking. What do I do? Linda leaned forward, her eyes hard. File for divorce. Freeze your accounts. Protect yourself and Emily. If he's left everything to Denise and her kids in the will, he's already planning to leave you with nothing. Don't let him. Martha nodded, her jaw clenched. The hurt, the betrayal, the anger, it all crystallized into a single, searing resolve. Paul had already made his choice. He had chosen Denise and her children. Now, it was Martha's turn to choose. Martha stood up, her back straight, her eyes steely. Thank you, Linda. I know what I need to do. That afternoon, Martha returned home and gathered her things. She packed a bag for herself and Emily, her hands steady and calm. Paul watched her from the kitchen, his eyes hollow and desperate. Martha, please, he said, his voice breaking. Don't do this. Don't leave. Martha met his gaze, her expression cold. You left us 14 years ago, Paul. I'm just catching up. She walked out of the house, her head held high, Emily's hand in hers. As they drove away, Martha felt a surge of clarity wash over her. The pain still sharp, but no longer blinding. The life she thought she had was gone, but a new one awaited. A life without Paul's lies. A life where she and Emily could finally breathe again. And as she drove away, the road stretching out before them, Martha knew she was ready to let go. Ready to start over. Ready to rebuild. And this time, she would do it on her own.